What are the best monuments? Well, Alhambra is available for everyone and gives you 5% admin efficiency. Meanwhile, the monument in Bangkok gives you 15% governing capacity, making those two crucial for world conquest runs. Those monuments are available for everyone, but even in the realm of monuments locked behind cultural and religious requirements, well, there are still monuments such as the Baku Ateshgah and the Bagan temples, which can give you buffs ranging from 10% discipline to a pretty insane +2 missionaries, for example. Both of these monuments, I believe, are rather well known and hence not really underrated though. And hence today my goal is not to look at the objective strength of each monument. I already made a tier list for that. I want to look at 5 specifically very underrated and forgotten monuments that are not flashy enough to draw attention on their own, but I believe are very underrated for the value they offer. This does mean that we may end up disagreeing on obscurity. I believe, for example, the Golden City, which you can see here giving you -1 interest per annum, is rather well known at this point. But naturally, you may disagree. Now, the monuments on today's list happen to be highly specialized. In many ways, their value will depend on the campaign you're doing. Hence, despite the fact that I will try and sort them as always from weakest to strongest on this list, this is going to be rather subjective depending on the campaign you're partaking in. But before we get into the list, let's get some quick things out of the way, and while I would normally take this opportunity to ask for likes and subscribers, well, instead I want to say that the 50k sub special Q&A, where the twist is I haven't seen the questions beforehand, well, that will be taking place on the 5th of April, with the final deadline to submit questions being on the 3rd. If that is something that you're interested in, please do not hesitate to join the dedicated Discord for those questions, allowing you to both submit and vote on questions you want to see me answer. But enough self-shilling, let's begin today with Salvador de Bahia. Now, I think this is one of those monuments that when you look at initially, you can kind of misunderstand the actual strength of this monument because it's really badly communicated, especially at a cursory glance. Now, the initial levels of it provide global settler increases, which level up, and global trade power, and the global trade power certainly isn't bad, and getting +20 global settlers at level 3 is, well, it's not bad, but the issue is, of course, is that if you're colonizing provinces in Brazil, this is a colonial region, so any campaigns that involve Castile, Portugal, England, or France, or your classic colonizers, that then end up grabbing this monument, you're just giving this monument to your colonial nation within most conventional gameplay runs, at which point it's not really worth it. But I think the assessment of this monument, as this is really good for global settlers and can give you local trade power to let you control Brazil, is underrated. I mean, I'll be honest, if you're spending thousands upon thousands of ducats to get this thing to level 3 and get +25 local trade power, well, it's probably just cheaper to conquer the Brazil trade node really at this point, and if you're leaking too much to the Ivory Coast, well, time for you to re-establish an Ivory Coast colony, right? That'll again probably be cheaper. No, the real power of this monument, and I think the part that makes it kind of underrated, is actually for Exodus campaigns, because the level 3 bonus gives the provinces in the region 0.5 goods produced. This is really strong. Because what is 0.5 goods produced? Well, each point of production dev here, we have 5 for example in the province, as you can see each point gives you 0.2 goods produced. This monument gives a region, our provinces in the region, which are owned by us, 0.5 goods produced, or 2.5 free dev clicks. How big is the Brazil region? Well, it's a bit bigger than the map mode would actually make you think if you're looking at the trade map mode, because this is the Brazil region. And when it comes to the Brazil region specifically, not only is it quite large, well, the trade goods in it are really, really good. Like if we take a look at some random examples, this province here, which is based in the deep Amazon, yeah, tropical wood 18.5% of the time, but this is a 12.5% chance of gold. There's 11% chance of gems, 11% chance of coffee, 11% chance of sugar, 11% chance of tobacco, and 11% chance of cocoa. Chances are you're getting a really good trade good out of this thing. And the secondary problem, of course, with trade goods in the deep Amazon rainforest is developing these provinces is painful. Jungle is +35% dev cost, and it's tropical, so you're looking at an extra 5% dev cost from being tropical. You're looking at +48 dev click overall, and this is with everything else ignored. However, flag goods produced does not care about the dev cost of the province. It's just going to give you 2.5 effective development worth of production income on every province, and this production income of course is going to scale with every workshop you build, meaning that getting this monument to level 3 is basically the equivalent of building 2.5 free manufactories in this region. And while obviously there are better ways of making money and so on and so forth, if you are doing a Brazil Exodus campaign, you really should unironically build around this monument because it is just that strong. Our region is quite a large area, especially if the region in question is Brazil, and of course some regions are smaller, like Brazil is a great region to have this monument in, but if your region was something like the Caucasus, well, that's like 15 provinces, half of which are mountains, so it's a lot sadder of a region to have it in. But this combination of being painful to dev jungle combined with excellent trade goods means that the 0.5 local goods produced is almost min-max to be really strong for your area, and hence it is a staunch recommendation for those considering Brazilian Exodus campaigns. Now, in terms of grabbing this monument just to colonize it and grab it for plus 10 global settlers, something like Portugal, well, the honest answer is that the two nations in position to do so, Portugal and Castile, are usually racing each other to colonize, well, the Caribbean, the good part of the New World, in terms of its development, and then getting to Mexico. What this does mean is that taking the time out of your day to colonize this province and then dumping money into the monument is just not worth it, especially considering the fact that you'll be losing it later. Portugal and Castile don't start that rich. Castile probably more so rich, so they can probably afford a bit more, but Portugal definitely cannot afford to be dropping even 1,000 ducats for plus 10 global settlers. It's just not worth it for them. And colonizing the province in the first place is going to set you back compared to just going straight for the good provinces that you care about. But that's going to be it for the Salvador da Bahia. I think that's the correct pronunciation, because we're going to move on to the Kazan Kremlin. Another monument that again has no requirements on it, but this monument has a very weird use. Namely, it strongly buffs the garrisons inside your forts. What do I mean by this? Well, as you can see here, every fort has a garrison. Depending on the fort level, any garrison modifies, for example, building around defensive or quantity. What this monument does at level 3 is plus 100% garrison army damage. It also gives you friendly movement speed in the region, which, in fairness, this is a pretty big region again. The Ural region is an area where 25% friendly movement speed is nice, but I'll be honest, you're probably not wanting to fight in this area. In fact, you're probably avoiding to fight in this area, so the best thing about this monument means that if you do happen to have armies in the, well, Ural region, you can leave the Ural region faster, so that part's useful. Regardless, most of the other things in here aren't great. Great project upgrade time is a bit of a joke, because most of the time when you're actually building the great projects, you just dump money into them to get them finished faster. Garrison army damage is the big one here. See, first of all, in multiplayer, assaulting forts is relatively common, and it tends to be pretty free, unless the mod developers, if you're playing the multiplayer with a mod, tend to buff the garrison army damage to something like plus 100%, in which case it stops being free. Now, you don't need the mod developers to do that if you're playing a vanilla game and have access to the Kazan Kremlin, because this is basically the buff for you. This makes the assaults go from free to being basically suicide attempts. So yeah, for that purpose in multiplayer it absolutely dominates. But where this gets interesting is this actually has a use in single player. Why? Well, first of all, you can sally from forts if an enemy is sieging you. And this is where it gets interesting, because the way that garrison army damage actually works is that it's basically combatability for your garrison army troops. The moment that those garrison army troops pop out of the garrison and enter the field of battle, they gain plus 100% infantry combatability. I'm not kidding. Plus 50 garrison army damage is plus 50 ICA equivalent. Same at plus 100 here. Now, the student actually had a video talking about this where he specifically stacked the garrison army damage possible and would go ahead and obliterate quite a few coalition armies, showing off again in said video. And if you want to see that taken to its extreme, you're more than welcome to do so. But this monument on its own, if you then go and stack quantity and defensive, can give you like 10,000 extra troops out of a level 4 fort and higher that you can just grab and sally to cause a lot of pain and suffering for the AI. 10k troops with 100 ICA is going to do a lot of damage, and hence should not be understated. But outside of very, very competitive MP lobbies, and frankly nowhere in single player, do I see the Kazan Kremlin even used as a monument. It's good, give it a shot. But that is enough talking about the Kazan Kremlin. We're going to move on now to Tsin-Tsun-Tsan? I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, that's my best attempt. Regardless, what does this monument actually do? Well, it gives you access at level 3 to a rather unique ability. You ignore coring distance. I hope I don't have to elaborate for too long why this is a completely busted ability. For one, it lets you core without having to do that in a line. You can conquer any province in the world anywhere because you can just core it. And yeah, in terms of utility for a world conquest to set up, this thing is insane. Combined with 30% culture conversion time reduction, and there's not that much culture conversion time reduction in the game, so again, pretty useful, and an extra plus 2 dip rep for the fact that you're probably going to be sitting at plus 500% overextension, hence diplomatic reputation. Probably a useful thing to get a bonus to. Yeah, this thing's good. Now, where it does have a debuff is that you do need to be Nahuatl to do this thing and become Aztec, or Central American. So yeah, this thing is pretty good. The main utility of it is of course the ignoring coring distance, but it does have the main issue, namely that you do need to actually flip to a Central American culture, and you need to flip to the Nahuatl religion to use this thing. But ironically enough, I believe it's worth it. Ignoring coring distance is just a really strong setup, and 30% culture conversion time is really, really useful for a one culture run if you're trying to try one. It does also probably mean that you're moving your capital to the New World as part of the setup, but there you go. Given its pretty insane bonuses, I think this is a massively underrated monument. But there's not much more to say here, this thing is just good. But again, it does need a specific culture and religion. But if there is going to be one monument that frankly needs to have a specific culture or religion tied to it, but doesn't, meaning it's very useful for basically anyone that gets their hands on, well, of course I'm talking about the Afak Koja Mausoleum. I believe that's my best attempt at that word. Anyway, this thing is stupidly good because it has no requirements, anyone can grab it, and at level 3 it gives you 50% religious unity, in practice basically solving religious unity problems for your nation. Full stop. It also comes with monthly piety accelerator, which is rather ironic because it doesn't have a religious requirement to build it, meaning that non-Muslims which don't use the piety mechanic can just build this thing anyway and not suffer religious unity. And this is really what the monument does, it means you don't have to suffer religious unity debuffs anymore. And what's more interesting is actually its placement. Russia campaigns can eventually, after they conquer their local area and expand into the hordes, pick up this monument, and religious unity is a major problem for Russia. It has Orthodox people that it, has as its core land, sure, but there's a lot of Sunnis it's conquering, there's a lot of Catholics and Protestants and a whole bunch of other mess that it's conquering. This is a really useful monument for Russia. Another place which is ironically pretty close to it, and has religious unity problems, is going to be the Mughals. They don't exactly have religious unity problems in the sense that they're very tolerant, but they have a couple mechanics where they can lose religious unity to gain other debuffs, and, well, religious unity is a joke because here's a monument for 50% of the Mughals are basically 2 provinces away from conquering. So, yeah, that's trivial for them. But which also makes it more interesting is actually going to be for China campaigns. See, China starts pretty religious united as Confucian, but if you expand beyond your borders, you're going to find that all the people next to you are really not Confucian. If I have a lot of Buddhist peeps around you, you have the more Buddhist, different flavor of Buddhists around you, you have Tengri, there's even some Shinto, really not good for religious unity. And while Confucians can accept and harmonize with everyone, so eventually it's not a problem, well, grabbing this monument for China is actually pretty good, because again, it just makes that whole process a lot easier. A lot of nations in the area can really utilize this thing quite effectively. Even any kind of empire within India is able to just push into the mountains here, easier said than done in real life, but certainly easy within EU4. And once you've taken the mountains and got to the mausoleum, you can build it and not have religious issue problems. In a weird way, it's not that snakeable. If you are a coastal empire from Europe or something, you have to pretty much conquer India, or at least set up a snake through Persia and through India to get to the thing. But once you do, you can pretty much use this thing to turn off the religious unity debuff mechanic. It also, weirdly enough, comes as a bonus to absolutism, as having high religious unity is good for max absolutism, so that's kind of a side effect of this thing. But again, where this monument really stupidly shines is it lets you just ignore the religious unity mechanic once you grab it, because 50% religious unity is an insane bonus. But with that said, we finally move on to the last monument, but before we do, we have to do an honorable mention. A monument that I believe that if I don't mention, a lot of people will mention it in the comments because they believe it's going to be some super obscure thing. Now, I don't believe it's very obscure, but it's still worthy of a mention in my books, and I'm of course referring to this thing right in the north of Canada, the Inukshuk, this pile of rocks that you can find over there. Now, first of all, you can steal the pile of rocks. It's not actually that expensive to steal the pile of rocks, and what's more convenient is that if you do have a colonial nation that grabs it, you can just steal it, which makes it a lot more helpful than the other New World monuments. For example, Cahokia would be quite nice. Look at that, 20% national manpower. Unfortunately, you have to play in the New World. And again, there's quite a few monuments that are like that in the New World that are very good. I'm not going to go into them here. But the main thing that makes this thing amazing is, much like Stonehenge, a different pile of rocks, you can just take it. But the bonuses it provides are really, really nice. Cost of advisors with ruder culture, well, just hire advisors with your ruder culture, and a 20% discount is quite a hefty one, so one I would recommend. Plus, max promoted cultures, though, is also really useful, as it just lets you get an extra 2 cultures worth of people to promote. And don't forget, an extra promoted culture isn't just free cultures that are accepted, it also gives you access to extra monuments. So, for example, if you want to use something like the Parthenon, well, that requires you to be Greek or Athenian. However, you can just accept those cultures and use it anyway, if you're not Greek and Athenian already, meaning that, in essence, plus super max promoted culture slots is more monument slots, and hence more modifiers. To really add insult to injury, it also decreases your promote culture cost, which you're probably doing at this point, so as a humanist builder, this thing is monstrously good, I'd recommend. And while I would say it's not exactly underrated, I believe it's pretty well known at this point. If you don't know about it, you're going to consider this random monument in the middle of nowhere in northern Canada pretty obscure, so hence it deserves the mention. But finally, let's get to the actual number 1 slot, and I'm of course referring to Nan Madol. So why Nan Madol? Well, it's actually another monument that starts in an uncolonized province. However, unlike other New World uncolonized monuments, this one, when you colonize, you can't just keep, as it's not part of any colonial nation area. However, while its actual bonuses on the surface aren't that insane, plus 10 global settlers, which become plus 25 global settlers with some extra settler chance and yearly navy tradition, is in a very unique position, which makes those monuments extra shiny and extra useful. Because when are you actually using this monument? Well, I believe in two separate scenarios. The first scenario is you're playing someone like England and you're going for a world conquest, or you're playing someone like the Ottomans and going for a world conquest, which means by the time you get to this place, you have loads of money, and what this monument provides is plus 1 yearly naval tradition at level 3, which is actually pretty useful. But at this point, it's just another sign thing. You grab the bonus and you move on with your life. It doesn't impact you that much, which means that it's not inherently useless late game, and especially once you've done settling, this monument doesn't sit wasting away. No. The actual thing that makes this monument really cool is the other way of getting it, namely if you're doing a Japanese colonial game or a Ming colonial game. If you're doing a China colonial game or a Japan colonial game, you should absolutely go out of your way and grab the colonization of Micronesia. If I'm able to click on it, that took an embarrassingly long time. There we go, we've clicked on it. Colonize this province. Why? Well, even if you just finish colonizing it, you're going to immediately get this monument at level 1, because it starts at level 1, it's just uncolonized, giving you plus 10 global settlers, which late game sure is a pretty small bonus, but early game that adds up to quite a bit of a time reduction, because there's not that many global settler bonuses you're able to pick up. Meanwhile, if you're also playing as someone like China, you're rich, so you can probably afford to dump a whole bunch of money into Nanmadol and actually get this thing to level 3. Or if you're playing as Japan, well, you're right outside of China, so you can kind of invade them, punch them for money, and use that money to upgrade Nanmadol for your colonial game again. This creates a really weird place where, despite being a level 3 monument, and usually the unaffordability factor is a factor here, most of the people that you're actually playing this with, colonial Japan or colonial China, or even someone like colonial Micronesia, or, well, basically anyone that's not Australia, you have access to either Chinese money or the Chinese treasury by punching the Chinese, which lets you fund these monuments. And plus 5 global settlers and plus 25 global settler increase super early on is really, really nice. It is certainly very much carried by the fact that being colonized at level 1 already gives you a 10% global settler bonus, and the fact that it is kind of on the way. If you are trying to colonize to the New World, it does give you the colonial range that you need to keep going forward. So, yeah, on that domain, it absolutely holds its own. Is it super flashy and strong like plus 10% discipline? Absolutely not. But if you are doing a colonial campaign in this area, it would be absolutely foolish of you to not pick this monument up. Now, with that all said, though, that is going to be all the time I have for today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, W Haste, Suleiman, Star72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Nanhatan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Radamil Flavia, Connor, Andrew Salberg, Deki, Sov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napa, Glorious Leader, Zerkis, and Mr. Coomshock.